So I see tons of people across all Rocket League media asking one question over and over again. Which car is the best car? And most people are given the same answer with a common, well, it's just preference and no car is the best car. And while that answer can be true, and for most players it's probably correct, I decided I would do a little digging around with various car stats and try to answer why certain cars are used more than others. I don't want to make this video too complex, so we're just going to start out by answering a simple question. Which car do pro players use the most? I understand that by looking at types of cars that pro players use doesn't really speak for which car is the best, but usually you find that higher level players tend to gravitate towards a certain meta. And we won't really know which car is the most popular unless the devs release those numbers. So during the first and second Rocket League Championship Series, or RLCS for short, there were 4 main cars that were used by pro players, with a few others being oddities here and there. Really, I'm sure you could just pick any car and it would fit just fine in that 5th slot. 3 out of the 4 main cars were used significantly less than the 4th. Those 3 cars are the Breakout, the Batmobile, and the Dominus. The number 1 car used during the RLCS by pro players was the Octane. So now we ask the question, what makes the cars different? Aside from a few technical things, there are really 2 main factors in a car. You have the hitbox size, and you have the car's turning radius. And when it comes to the turning radius, it should be noted that those stats have pretty much become negligible since Psyonix has revamped most cars to have very similar turning rates, which was not the case in the early days of Rocket League. They've worked very hard on giving certain cars buffs and nerfs to make all cars more balanced, but that doesn't mean that certain cars don't stand above others. If we take a look at the hitbox stats, we can compare the top 5 from each category to the top 4 cars that pro players use. The top 5 longest hitboxes are the Breakout, the Hotshot, the Batmobile, the Masamune, and the DeLorean. The top 5-ish widest hitboxes are the Marauder, the Batfire, the Batmobile, the Gizmo, the Octane, the Proteus, Vulcan all have the exact same hitbox, with the Zippy being very similar, but it just happens to have the same width as all those cars. 5th, we have the Aftershock, Dominus, and Next Level that all have the exact same hitbox. I know this really isn't a top 5, but all you really need to know is that these cars are better than average. The top 5 tallest hitboxes are the Merc, the Scarab, the Roadhog, the Grog, and the Marauder. And the top 5 cars with the largest total surface area are the Marauder, Gizmo, Merc, Hotshot, and Roadhog. So if we take a look at the top 5-ish from each section, we can see that the 4 cars we discussed earlier are on the list at some point with at least better than average stats in one category. But what it's really showing us is that a larger hitbox and total surface area does not make a better or more popular car. I'm sure most veteran players know this, but now we ask the question, why are popular cars used so much? I mean, just by taking a look, if you look at the Batmobile, Breakout, and Dominus, that question's relatively simple. On top of having a car model that's very similar to the shape of the hitbox, they are also some of the longest and widest cars in the game, with the Breakout having the most length in the game, while also having one of the thinnest widths and shortest height hitboxes. The Batmobile is just as short in height and almost as long as the Breakout, but it's one of the widest cars in the game. And then you have the Dominus, which is the love child of these 2 cars, and overall just has a good middle ground in length, width, and height. A lot of players like these cars because they look at them as sort of a paddle, and you use their length and width to cover a large area of a goal, or maybe you find it easier to hit the ball if you're slightly off, at least when compared to a smaller car. Their short height makes it easier to get underneath the ball, and then the long length and width allows for very effective flicks. But the cars can have their issues when it comes to 50-50s or blocking situations because of just how short they are. A low height hitbox also means that you might have to jump at certain moments when the ball is bouncing towards you, where otherwise a car with a taller hitbox like the Octane might just be able to stay grounded. So let's take a look at the Octane, which is probably the most used car in the game, and its popularity could purely be based on the fact that it's the first car you are given to play, and when we look at its hitbox stats, it's pretty short in length when compared to most cars, but it's pretty wide and it's kind of tall. The car is great for dribbling challenges and 50-50s because of its tall hitbox. It's also great for bounce dribbling, which a lot of high-level players utilize, and it might feel a little difficult for flicks because of the short length, but they're definitely possible. Honestly, it's just a really well-rounded car that doesn't restrict you, and I think that's one of the main benefits of the Octane. Funny enough, the Octane and Dominus are very similar in hitbox ranks, but just in different categories. If you look at the total rank in each category and you just move it over slightly, the ranks are almost identical. This may or may not be the cause for their overwhelming popularity, but I thought I'd just throw it in there. Now, one thing that kind of bothered me as I looked over these stats was just how odd it was that so few players, even the non-pros, rarely use the Marauder, which has higher stats when it comes to the length, width, and height compared to the Octane. The turning radius of both these cars is incredibly close, so why were so many people choosing the Octane over the Marauder? I know we discussed earlier that a larger hitbox does not equal a better or more popular car, but the Marauder is just the Octane with slightly better stats. So I looked into it. First I thought, well, it could be preference. I didn't like the way the car sounded, but then again, it's really hard to use that logic when the Batmobile of all cars is so popular. Then you have the argument of, well, it's a DLC car and people have to pay for it. But that gets thrown out the window when you see just how popular the Dominus and Batmobile are. I mean, it's possible, and I'm sure it accounts for a large portion of people who don't like the Marauder, or maybe you're just used to the Octane and you don't want to change, but something still felt off when I compared both the cars. So I did some more digging and I found a Reddit thread that discussed some extra lines of code that people had previously looked over. Now, Psyonix has said in the past that there are leftover and unused assets or lines of code that people have speculated on, but the research that this user found, ran, and tested seems to be very accurate, and I would love to see the community back it up. The thread discusses a lot of things that are fairly complex, but the one simple stat that I really found interesting was hitbox elevation. Hitbox elevation is the distance from the ground that the hitbox is while driving. This stat is really important with the Octane because its hitbox elevation value is so high that it actually makes it quite a bit taller than the Marauder. Now, the Marauder's hitbox is still taller in the air, but when on the ground, it's shorter when compared to the Octane. The two cars are still very close, but this stat can really help us decide which car is better statistically for player preferences when a car has the same or similarly identical hitbox as another car. Like we talked about earlier, the Aftershock and X-Devil have exactly the same hitbox as the Dominus, but then when you add hitbox elevation to the equation, the Dominus is actually slightly taller on the ground when compared to both cars. So now with all these stats, I bet you're wondering, the Octane is so used, it's so popular, it has to be the best car, is it? Is it the best car? Well, it certainly can be for certain situations, and because of its large hitbox, it allows for a lot of diverse hits, with its only small downside being its short length. I do believe that it's more popular for several other reasons, stats aside, but the car is very well rounded. Is it the best car though? It might be for some people, but not for others. Now looking at these stats, the four cars, the Batmobile, the Breakout, the Dominus, the Octane, the reason that these cars are used above the rest is because they are better than average in most categories. The Batmobile and Dominus have better than average stats in length and width. Breakout users are prioritizing length above all their stats, but my theory on why the Octane is so much more popular than most other cars is A, it's the first car you were given, and players tend to stick to what they know best, and B, it's a car that allows you to do pretty much everything decently. It's only better than average in most ways, but it's not the best in any one area. The reason that so many people answer with the same thing every time of no car is the best car and it's purely preference is because that's the truth. Certain cars are better for certain people. Some cars add to your weaknesses while others might hurt your strengths. These four cars just happen to add to most players' strengths and weaknesses. Find your strengths and find your weaknesses, and test it with cars of opposite values. While these four cars are great and are all easily my go-tos, you might like a different car, and that's fine. Don't let other people make you change from your favorite car. Honestly, I could probably tell you all that a random car like the Zippy is the best, and I bet a small amount of you, would actually change to it because some guy on YouTube said it was the best car, so it must be. Just realize that if you want to play more grounded, then perhaps you choose a car with more height like the Octane. Maybe you want a car that makes it easier to flick the ball and you decide to use a wider and longer car like the Dominus. If you're trying to figure out if car X goes with skill Y, just test it out. Really, it's that simple. If you find something that you're trying to get the hang of, or maybe you want a car that fits better with your playstyle, just test it out. If you're interested in the stats, they're all going to be down below in the description. I hope I've given you an adequate amount of information for you to find your perfect car, and hopefully given you some insight onto why certain cars are more popular. If you have any questions, you can leave them down below in the comment section, or you can find me on Twitter at @Sir_Timbers. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.